They say the first gods rose not from the heavens, but from the mud, from the thick, glimmering waters that rolled endlessly between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. It was here, long before pyramids or prophets, that humanity first gave shape to its own questions. Who are we? Why do we die? And who watches from the dark beyond the sky? Sit back and let your mind drift there to the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, where the air was heavy with silt, and the first city lights shimmered across canals older than time. In these lands, creation began not with divine command, but with struggle, the eternal wrestling of water and clay. The Sumerians called the primeval sea Namu, the mother who gave birth to everything. From her depths came An, the god of the heavens, and Ki, the goddess of earth. When they met, their union produced Enlil, the storm lord who would later tear the sky from the land. Some say it was through this violent act that the world took its first breath. Others whisper that it was the first rebellion, the beginning of divine conflict that would echo across the millennia. The first humans were molded from clay, shaped by divine fingers, and infused with the breath of gods who wanted servants to carry their burdens. But the stories disagree. Some say it was love that made the gods create man. Others claim it was exhaustion. Yet across all versions, one image remains constant, a trembling being, fresh from the mud, blinking beneath a sky that still remembered being joined to the earth. Fires burned along riverbanks as the first temples rose, ziggurats climbing toward the heavens in mimicry of divine mountains. The gods lived close then, in the sound of thunder, in the floodwaters that swallowed crops, in the cries of priests who offered song and blood to hold back the chaos. But from the beginning there was tension between the order of the gods and the restlessness of the humans below, between the divine desire for silence and humanity's growing need to question. And as the winds of Enlil howled across the plains, one truth began to settle in the hearts of mortals. The gods who made them were not perfect. They were powerful, but flawed, and soon their world would collide. They say that when Enlil separated heaven from earth, the world itself cried out. The rivers raged, mountains shuddered, and the first winds tore through the silence like knives through silk. The heavens became the domain of an undistant and untouchable, while the land below was left in the care of Enlil, the restless storm god who carried both life and destruction in his breath. Beneath them, the waters still churned, ruled by Enki, the clever god of wisdom and the deep. He was the trickster among the divine, the one who could bend the rules written in the stars. And it was said that his laughter rippled across the canals when mortals first learned to speak his name. The divine order had been set, but it was fragile. The gods were powerful yet impatient, and the earth still resisted them. Humanity, newly formed and confused, toiled in the mud, offering prayers that rose like mist but rarely reached the heavens. The Sumerians believed that the gods did not listen easily. They demanded attention, devotion, sacrifice. Temples rose higher, ziggurats stacked like stairways to the sky, each brick a plea to be seen. Priests moved through the shadows of oil lamps, chanting words that shimmered like heat in the night. They told of the sacred decrees that governed everything from kingship to fertility, from justice to chaos itself. Enki guarded these laws, hidden in the waters of Eridu, while humans tried desperately to understand them. But understanding came at a cost. The gods' attention was a dangerous gift. When Enlil's storms swept over the plains, they could bless the land with rain or drown it beneath fury. When Inanna, the goddess of love and war, looked upon a city, it could rise in glory or burn under her desire. Every prayer was a gamble, every sacrifice a negotiation with forces beyond mercy. And yet, humans continued to build, to dream, to reach upward, because in the flicker of torchlight, they saw a reflection of themselves in the divine. The gods, with all their passions and flaws, were mirrors of human nature made immortal. And so the boundary between heaven and earth blurred once again, as mortals began to believe that perhaps they were not merely servants, but echoes of the gods themselves, born to challenge them, to understand them, and in time, to surpass them. The clay that once shaped humanity soon shaped their empires. Along the banks of the Euphrates, the first cities rose like living testaments to divine ambition: Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, each one a reflection of heaven on earth. The people believed their cities were not built by mortal hands alone, but guided by unseen architects, gods who whispered through dreams, who marked foundations with starlight. The sound of chisels and chanting filled the air. The smell of wet clay mixed with incense, and the rhythm of human life began to pulse in step with the divine. In Uruk, the mighty Inanna watched over her people, goddess of love, war, and the unpredictable heart. Her temples glimmered with lapis and gold, filled with statues that seemed to breathe in the lamplight. Worshippers brought offerings of oil and honey, yet their songs were not of peace. They were of desire, conquest, and longing. Inanna embodied both creation and destruction, a duality that defined Mesopotamian thought, that nothing sacred came without sacrifice. The priests spoke of balance, of maintaining harmony between gods and men, but the stories told a different truth. When the fields failed or floods came early, humans whispered that the gods were displeased, hungry, or jealous. And when abundance filled their granaries, they wondered if the gods had simply forgotten them. The relationship between divine and mortal was fragile, unpredictable, a constant dance of devotion and fear. In the city of Eridu, Enki's priests guarded secret knowledge, the Mi tablets, said to contain the essence of civilization itself. They taught writing, mathematics, and the reading of stars, claiming that these gifts were the language of the gods. And so, humanity began to write its own destiny upon clay tablets, pressing wedge-shaped marks that would outlast empires. Yet, as knowledge spread, so did pride. Kings began to see themselves not as servants of the gods, but as chosen reflections, half divine, half mortal, rulers by sacred right. And with this belief came the first spark of rebellion, the first whisper that perhaps mankind's purpose was not only to serve the heavens, but to question them. The gods had shaped men from clay, but now men were shaping the gods in return, carving their likenesses, rewriting their stories, and giving new names to the eternal forces that ruled the stars, beneath the rivers that fed Mesopotamia's cradle. The gods of the abyss stirred in the dark. The Sumerians spoke of Abzu, the sweet water beneath the earth, and Tiamat, the salt sea of chaos. Their union gave birth to the first gods, yet their quarrel would nearly destroy creation itself. In those early days, the world was not yet stable. The gods argued, their voices like thunder rolling across the plains. Enki, Lord of Wisdom, moved quietly among them, whispering secrets that soothed or divided, depending on what balance he sought. It was said that when the younger gods grew restless, disturbing the sleep of their elders, Abzu rose in anger, threatening to drown them all back into silence. But Enki, ever cunning, struck first, lulling Abzu into sleep, then killing him in the depths. From Abzu's waters, Enki built his own sacred city, Eridu, where he ruled over wisdom, magic, and life itself. Yet, as with all victories in Mesopotamian myth, this one came at a price. Tiamat awoke. Her fury was the fury of the sea itself, boundless, cold, maternal, and merciless. She spawned monsters, serpents, and winged beasts to avenge her mate, and the cosmos trembled beneath her rage. The gods were terrified. None dared to face her, until one Marduk, the young champion of Babylon, stepped forward. Armed with storms and reason, he confronted the great dragon and split her body in two. From one half, he shaped the heavens. From the other, the earth. Her eyes became rivers, her spine the arch of the Milky Way. Thus the world was born not from harmony, but from violence, a truth the Mesopotamians never forgot. Every flood, every drought, every tremor in the ground reminded them that creation was fragile and borrowed, that chaos waited just beneath the surface. The priests of Marduk told this story not as myth, but as warning that order existed only because someone once conquered the sea. Even now, when the people of Babylon knelt before their towering ziggurat, they looked upward and whispered their prayers into a sky carved from the bones of a goddess. They believed that as long as they remembered Tiamat's fall, the world would remain whole, but forgetting her would mean letting the sea rise again, swallowing gods and mortals alike. The breath of Enki in the shimmering heat of Eridu, where reeds whispered and canals glowed under the moonlight, the god Enki moved unseen. He was the keeper of secrets, the one who shaped destiny not with thunder or flame, but with the quiet precision of thought. His temple, the Iabzu, was said to rest on the threshold between worlds, half in the waters of the deep, half on the land of men. The priests who served him spoke of strange visions that came in dreams, of voices rising from the currents, of hands unseen guiding the tide of human invention. They said Enki breathed wisdom into clay, teaching mankind the crafts of irrigation, writing, and healing. He was the god who smiled when others raged, whose power came not from force but from understanding. When the other gods sought to destroy what they did not comprehend, Enki whispered another path. He taught that knowledge could shape the world as surely as storms. Under his watch, cities flourished. Scribes carved lines of language into wet tablets, inventing memory. Farmers tamed the floods with channels that mirrored the veins of the earth. Everything humans learned, they credited to Enki, the divine engineer, the trickster of mercy. But the gods above watched with unease. Enlil, lord of wind and authority, saw mankind growing restless, no longer silent in their devotion. He feared that Enki had given too much, that mortals armed with knowledge might soon challenge the heavens themselves. In the councils of the gods, debates echoed like thunder. Should man be silenced again? Should the floodwaters return to wash the clay clean? Enki said nothing, but his waters stirred, for he had already whispered warnings to a chosen few, preparing them for what was to come. In the nights before the deluge, fishermen spoke of dreams filled with rushing waves, and temple servants claimed to hear voices beneath the floor, counting down the days until the world would drown. Yet even as the storm gathered, Enki's smile lingered. He knew that creation could not be unmade without remembrance. He would save the memory of life, not through power, but through cunning. And when the waters finally rose, it would be his wisdom, not Enlil's wrath, that would determine who survived to rebuild the world, the flood and the clay. Survivor the sky had turned black for 7 days before the first wave struck. It began as a whisper, the sound of distant thunder rolling beyond the horizon, but soon the rivers rose. swollen with the anger of the gods. The people fled to the rooftops, clutching their children and idols, calling out to heavens that did not answer. This was the flood foretold in dreams, the punishment that Enlil had decreed upon mankind for their noise, their ambition, their endless striving to touch the divine. Yet even in the shadow of annihilation, one man had been warned. His name was Atrahasis, the exceedingly wise, a man of devotion and patience. It was Enki who came to him in secret, speaking through the walls of his reed hut, telling him to build a vessel sealed with bitumen, large enough to hold his family, his animals, and the seeds of all living things. Tear down your house, the voice whispered, and build a ship. Abandon your possessions. Save life. Atrahasis obeyed, and as his neighbors mocked, he worked under the rising wind, each plank a prayer against extinction. When the storm came, it came not as rain, but as fury, the roar of the abyss reclaiming the world. The seas swallowed cities, mountains disappeared beneath boiling waves, and even the gods trembled at the devastation they had unleashed. Only Enki wept quietly in his underwater palace, for he had saved what the others sought to destroy. For 7 nights and days, the ark drifted through endless darkness. The cries of the dying faded into silence, replaced by the groan of wood against water. When at last the storm broke, Atrahasis opened a window and saw a vast, empty sea beneath a sky the color of ash. He released a dove, then a raven, and when the latter did not return, he knew the land had begun to dry. He built an altar and offered sacrifice, and the smoke rose into the heavens, reaching the nostrils of the gods. Starving, remorseful, they descended like flies, drawn by the scent of what remained of life. Enlil raged that a mortal had survived, but Enki only smiled and said, "You wanted silence. Now let man live, but let him know limits." And so from destruction came balance, a covenant of mortality. That man would endure, but never again rise without consequence. The descent of Ishtar, when the world was quiet again and the rivers receded to their banks. The goddess Ishtar began to wander, restless among the living. She had known the pleasures of love and the power of creation, but her heart hungered for something deeper, the secret of death itself. The memory of Atrahasis's survival, the defiance of man against the divine flood, lingered in her thoughts like an unsung hymn. If man could survive the gods' wrath, then what lay hidden in the shadow realm that even gods feared to enter? Her curiosity became obsession, and her obsession became descent. She approached the gates of Urkala, the underworld ruled by her dark sister, Erishkigal, whose name was never spoken above ground without shivering. 7 gates guarded the realm, each demanding a price. At the first gate, Ishtar surrendered her crown, the symbol of her dominion. At the second, her earrings of power. At the third, her jeweled necklace, each gem a prayer from her worshippers. By the time she reached the 7th gate, she stood naked and bowed, stripped not just of adornment, but of identity. The gatekeeper spoke, "Thus must all who enter shed what they were." Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. The souls of the dead wandered aimlessly, whispering to no one. Erishkigal sat upon a throne of bone and salt, her eyes hollow, her hands like dried roots. "Why have you come here, sister of the light?" she asked, her voice like wind moving through tombs. "To taste what you rule," Ishtar answered. "To know the stillness that even gods must one day face." But the laws of Akkad were unbending. To enter was to die. The judges of the underworld seized her, and the 7 gates closed behind her. Above, the earth began to change. The rivers ceased to flow, the trees stopped blooming, and no child cried in the cradle. The world grew barren because the goddess of love and fertility was gone. Even the sun dimmed in grief. The gods panicked and turned to Ea, who crafted a desperate plan to send a messenger bearing the waters of life. When these were poured upon Ishtar's lifeless form, her eyes opened, but she could not leave unless another took her place. Thus began the endless cycle, descent, death, and return, the rhythm by which life itself was bound to the underworld. The bargain of Dumuzi, when Ishtar rose again from the shadowed depths. She carried with her a silence that unsettled even the heavens. She had glimpsed the face of stillness, the emptiness that swallows all prayers. And she returned, changed, colder, quieter, as if a part of Arkala had followed her into the light. The gods celebrated her rebirth, but Ereshkigal demanded balance. The underworld must not be cheated, she said, her voice echoing through the chambers of the dead. If one returns, another must descend. And so the eyes of judgment turned upon Dumuzi, Ishtar's beloved, the shepherd king who had once sung songs to the gods and crowned her temples with offerings of milk and honey. When the demons of Arkala came for him, he tried to flee, but even the swiftest of men cannot outrun the laws of balance. The ground opened beneath his feet, and shadows wrapped around his ankles like chains. Ishtar, watching from the temple steps, felt the echo of her own grief. For the world demanded that life and death dance in perpetual exchange. Some say she allowed it willingly, offering him as tribute to restore the seasons. Others whisper that Dumuzi's arrogance had grown too vast, and this was her vengeance disguised as sorrow. In his descent, the earth began to wither. Grass turned brittle, rivers slowed, flocks grew thin. The people mourned him as a god who died for their fertility. But every spring, when the rains returned and the first buds appeared, they said it was Dumuzi's spirit rising again, allowed to leave the underworld for half the year, while his sister Geshtinana took his place for the other half. Thus, the pattern of seasons was born, a divine echo of love and loss repeated endlessly beneath the stars. In each renewal, Ishtar's tears watered the soil, and Dumuzi's footsteps stirred the fields back to life. Yet even in joy, there lingered the memory of descent. The price every living thing must pay. The Mesopotamians understood then that the cycle of fertility and decay was not punishment but truth, that even gods could not escape the pull of Akkad, and that every blooming flower was only a brief rebellion against the inevitable return to dust. The wisdom of Adapa, among the windswept plains of Eridu, beneath the first stars that guided the fishermen home. There lived a man unlike any other Adapa, the sage of Ea, born of clay but touched by divine intelligence. He was said to know the speech of birds, the movements of the sea, and the secrets of the wind. His wisdom was both a gift and a burden. Foreknowledge in Mesopotamia was never innocent. It carried the weight of divine order. One day, while tending to the temple of Ea, Adapa was struck by the south wind, which overturned his boat and cast him into the deep. In anger, he cursed the wind and broke its wings, silencing the currents that brought life to the land. When the wind failed to blow for 7 days, the god Unu, ruler of the heavens, summoned Adapa to answer for his defiance. Ea, the god of wisdom and Adapus creator, knew the danger. He instructed his servant to approach heaven with humility, to bow before the gatekeepers, Tammuz and Gishida, and to refuse whatever food or drink Anu might offer. For though it would seem a gesture of mercy, Ea warned, it was in truth a test. To consume the bread or water of death would bind him forever to the god's will. So Adapa obeyed. He ascended through the layers of heaven, past shimmering halls where divine watchers guarded the celestial order, and came before Anu himself. The god of heaven gazed down upon the mortal who had dared to wound the wind. But when Anu saw Adapa's wisdom, his calm voice, his reverence, he was moved. "This man," he said, "is no ordinary mortal. Let him share our immortality." And so the food and drink of eternal life were placed before him. But Adapa, faithful to Ea's counsel, refused. The gods looked on in astonishment. A mortal had just declined the gift they themselves coveted. When Anu learned that Ea had deceived his creation, he laughed, not in cruelty but in recognition of the paradox. Wisdom had saved Adapa, yet wisdom had also denied him eternity. He returned to earth, mortal still, wise beyond measure, but forever trapped between divine and human realms. The first man to understand that even perfect knowledge cannot conquer fate, only reveal it. The flood and the man who remembered long before the sands of Babylon settled. Before kings etched their names in stone, there was a man who survived the silence of the world, Utnapishtim, the one who lived through the flood that drowned creation. His story was whispered among temple priests, carved into fragments of clay, and later retold by strangers who called him by other names. But in the beginning, he was a man of Sheropuk, wise and humble, devoted to the god Ea. The gods had grown weary of mankind, their noise, their greed, their endless prayers that filled the heavens with unrest. So Enlil, lord of the storm, decreed that humanity would be washed away. Ea, bound by divine secrecy yet moved by pity, spoke to Utnapishtim through a dream. "Tear down your house," he said, "and build a ship. Abandon possessions, seek life. Take the seed of every living thing with you. The storm that comes will not spare even the mountains." And so, in silence and fear, Utnapishtim obeyed. His neighbors mocked him, calling him mad, but his hands did not falter. He sealed the ship with pitch, gathered his family, his animals, and the craftsmen who helped him build. Then, as dawn broke, the sky turned black. The winds screamed with the fury of forgotten gods, and the earth trembled as the floodgates of heaven opened. For 6 days and nights the waters devoured the world. Men clung to rooftops, temples vanished beneath the waves, and even the gods trembled at the destruction they had unleashed. On the 7th day, silence. The sea stretched endless and still, and Utnapishtim's ship rested upon the peak of Mount Nimush. When the waters receded, he released a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven. It did not return. Then Utnapishtim stepped onto dry land, built an altar, and offered sacrifice. The smoke rose into the sky, and the gods gathered like moths to the flame. Enlil, furious that any mortal had survived, was calmed only when Ea reminded him that destruction without renewal is chaos, not justice. And so the gods blessed Utnapishtim and his wife, granting them immortality as keepers of memory, witnesses to the end and the beginning. Through them, the Mesopotamians understood that survival was not victory but remembrance, that the story itself was the true ark carrying humankind across the flood of oblivion, the birth of kingship. When the waters of the great flood receded and the land began to breathe again, humanity rose from the mud, trembling but alive. The gods, having witnessed the chaos of ungoverned men, decreed that order must take form, not in divine hands, but through mortal vessels who would rule by celestial mandate. Thus began the age of kingship, the era when the gods gave power to those deemed worthy to carry their will upon the earth. It is said that kingship first ascended from heaven to Eridu, the oldest of the cities, where the sacred order of civilization began to take shape. There, the divine right to rule was seen not as privilege, but as burden, a duty to maintain the fragile balance between heaven and earth. The first kings were not conquerors, but mediators, standing between the unpredictable moods of gods and the desperate cries of men. Each king was believed to be chosen through omens, a thunderclap at dawn, a serpent in the temple, a dream whispering the name of destiny. The earliest lists of rulers, preserved on weathered clay tablets, spoke of kings whose reigns stretched for thousands of years, as if time itself bent to divine will. They were said to have ruled before the flood, in an age when the boundary between man and God was thinner than smoke. Yet, as centuries passed, kingship evolved. It became the backbone of empire, the chain that bound priesthood, war, and worship together. Temples grew taller, palaces gleamed with bronze, and the ziggurats of Sumer rose like mountains to mirror the gods' celestial abodes. To rule meant to mirror the heavens, to maintain cosmic order through justice, ritual, and might. The king's duty was both sacred and terrifying, for to fail meant not just rebellion, but cosmic disarray. When the fields dried or storms raged, the people turned to their ruler, believing his faith or failure had angered the gods. In those moments, kings became both divine representatives and scapegoats. The Mesopotamians understood their rulers not as immortal beings, but as fragile conduits of divine will, lightning rods for the storm of fate. And though names like Alulam, Etana, and Gilgamesh faded into dust, the idea of kingship endured. That power itself was not born from conquest, but from the eternal whisper of the heavens, guiding mortals to impose order upon chaos. Etana and the quest for the heavens among the first kings of post-Diluvian Sumer. One name stands apart, Etana of Kish, the shepherd chosen by the gods to bring order to a wounded world. His story, carved into broken tablets and whispered in temple chants, speaks of a man who dared to reach beyond the mortal sky. Etana ruled wisely, but his heart was heavy. His wife bore him no child, and without an heir, the fragile line between divine order and human rule trembled. Each night he prayed in the temple of Ishtar, asking for the plant of birth that would grant fertility. Yet no answer came until one night, in a dream, an eagle appeared, its wings vast as storm clouds, its voice like the wind over stone. The next day, while walking near the ruins of a sacred grove, Etana found the eagle trapped in a pit, its feathers torn, its eyes dull with hunger. Remembering his dream, he lifted the bird to safety. Grateful, the eagle said, "You have saved me from death. Call upon me when your heart seeks the heavens." And so, when despair returned, Etana climbed upon the eagle's back and rose into the sky. Higher and higher they soared, past the clouds, past the stars that shimmered like embers, until the earth was a distant circle beneath them. The air grew thin, the light burned white, and Etana's heart trembled with awe. "Where is the dwelling of Ishtar?" he asked. "Where can I find the plant of birth?" But the eagle's wings began to falter. The higher they rose, the more the air itself seemed to resist them, until finally the bird cried, "Look down, Etana. The world itself calls you back." Some versions say they fell, swallowed by the winds and lost to time. Others claim Etana reached the gate of heaven, spoke with the gods, and returned with the promise of a son. Either way, his story became a symbol of the eternal human desire to ascend beyond limits, to bridge the divide between mortal and divine. In every age since, kings and seekers alike have carried the same yearning to rise above the dust and glimpse the order that shapes the stars. Even knowing that the higher one climbs, the closer one comes to falling. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the search for immortality, few stories from ancient Mesopotamia have echoed so profoundly across time as the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tale of a king whose name was both feared and revered, whose deeds were carved into the memory of civilizations yet to come. Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, ruled the city of Uruk with unmatched strength and a restless heart. The walls of his city were monumental, the ziggurats towering like mountains of clay, yet within those walls, the people whispered of his tyranny, his arrogance, and the longing that gnawed at his immortal spirit. In the shadow of his grandeur appeared Enkidu, a wild man born of the steppe, his hair tangled with reeds, his body strong as the riverbanks, who would become both companion and mirror to the king. Together they ventured into the forbidden cedar forest, where trees taller than temples brushed the sky, where monsters carved by the gods themselves roamed and watched silently from the shadows. Some scholars suggest this journey represents the human confrontation with death itself, the attempt to pierce the veil of mortality. Others see it as an allegory of friendship, of the duality between civilization and nature, the heart and the body, the mortal and the divine, in their battles with the demon Humbaba and the bull of heaven. Gilgamesh and Enkidu both learn the delicate balance between power and humility, action and consequence. Yet it is in the death of Enkidu that Gilgamesh's journey truly begins. Consumed by grief, he flees from the inevitability of his own end, embarking on a quest across deserts, rivers, and storm-tossed seas, seeking Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood. He dives into the depths of waters that whisper secrets of the earth, climbs mountains shrouded in clouds, and confronts serpents that guard the threshold between life and death. The story does not offer immortality as a gift, but rather as a reflection that wisdom, memory, and the legacies we leave behind are the closest mortals come to touching eternity. Even today, the voice of Gilgamesh lingers in the echo of human ambition, in the silent yearning for understanding, and in the timeless question that sits beside every mortal heart. How can one face the certainty of death while seeking the infinite? And so, as the winds of history carry his tale, we are reminded that the search for immortality is less about escaping the end and more about discovering the depths of life itself. A lesson that resonates even 4,000 years later, in Ana, descent into the underworld, and the power of transformation among the pantheon of Mesopotamian deities. Few stories capture the imagination as vividly as that of Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, goddess of love, war, and fertility, whose journey to the underworld reveals the fragile balance between life and death, power and vulnerability. Inanna, adorned with jewels that shimmered like sunlight on the Euphrates, ruled with both beauty and ferocity, her gaze capable of stirring desire and dread in equal measure. Legends tell of her decision to descend into the shadowed realm of her sister Ereshkigal, the Dark Queen who presided over the land of the dead, a place where light faltered and whispers carried the weight of eternity. Some scholars suggest Inanna's descent reflects the seasonal cycles of nature, the death and rebirth of crops, or the internal transformations of the human psyche. Others see it as a meditation on the cost of ambition, the necessity of sacrifice, and the confrontation with one's deepest fears. Inanna passed through 7 gates, each stripping away a piece of her power, her garments, her symbols of status, until she arrived before Urishkagel stripped bare, vulnerable, and fully mortal. The silence of the underworld was absolute, broken only by the creak of shadows and the echo of her own heartbeat. Scholars debate the meaning of her temporary death. Is it a warning about the arrogance of the divine, a reflection on the inevitability of mortality, or an allegory for the transformative power of suffering? Even in death, Inanna's story is not final. She is resurrected through clever negotiation, intervention from gods like Enki, and the mystical circulation of life force, emphasizing that endings are often beginnings in disguise. Her return to the world above is neither quiet nor simple. It is a reclamation of identity, a negotiation with power, and a reminder that every descent carries the seed of ascent. Artists and storytellers in Mesopotamia depicted her with a crown of horns, her eyes blazing with knowledge of both life and death, a figure who commands both awe and empathy. Her myth resonates today, echoing in narratives of loss, resilience, and transformation, reminding us that the passage through darkness is as essential as the light that follows. And as we linger on the shadowed gates of the underworld, the question remains, what would we relinquish to emerge stronger, wiser, or renewed? And what truths lie waiting in the darkness that Inanna so boldly explored? The Epic of Gilgamesh, quest for immortality and the weight of human desire among all Mesopotamian myths. The Epic of Gilgamesh stands as a monumental exploration of mortality, friendship, and the relentless human pursuit of meaning. A story carved into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, yet resonating with themes that feel startlingly modern. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. A figure of immense strength and ambition, his presence both revered and feared by his people, who witnessed the tension between his godlike power and very human flaws. The epic begins with his tyranny and restless spirit, prompting the gods to create Enkidu, a wild man of the steppe, whose introduction into Gilgamesh's life is marked by a confrontation that soon transforms into an enduring friendship, a bond of loyalty, challenge, and mutual growth. Together, they embark on perilous adventures, confronting monstrous beings like Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, and the bull of heaven. Creatures whose immense size, strength, and danger are depicted with sensory richness, evoking forests heavy with resinous air, mountains trembling under divine wrath, and the palpable tension of life teetering on the edge. When Enkidu dies, a grief-stricken Gilgamesh is forced to confront the stark reality of mortality, a moment that shifts the epic from heroic conquest to existential quest, propelling him toward a desperate search for eternal life. Some scholars suggest that Gilgamesh's journey reflects the universal human struggle against the inevitability of death, while others propose it is a meditation on the limitations of power and the enduring value of wisdom over brute strength. His encounter with Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of a great flood, brings him face to face with the paradox of life and death, the fragility of human existence, and the fleeting nature of worldly accomplishments. The story brims with vivid imagery, the endless waters of the flood, the isolation of immortal life, the lush gardens and fragrant plants that hold the promise of renewal, yet slip away through inevitability. Even in failure, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk with profound insight, understanding that immortality is not granted to humans. Yet the legacy of deeds, stories, and cities offers a different kind of endurance. And as we ponder the walls of Uruk rising from the plain, the question lingers. If we cannot escape death, what mark will we leave behind? And what does it truly mean to live fully in the shadow of eternity? Creation, chaos, and the divine hierarchy, Mesopotamian cosmogony in the vast, shadowed beginnings of Mesopotamian thought. The story of creation unfolds not as a single neat tale, but as a layered and sometimes conflicting series of narratives, each revealing the ancients' attempts to understand the cosmos, the origins of life, and the volatile relationships among the gods. At the heart of these myths lies Tiamat, the primordial saltwater goddess, whose chaotic depths symbolize the untamed and formless state of existence before order emerged. A vast ocean where the first deities stirred like currents beneath a hidden sky. From her union with Apsu, the freshwater god, the earliest generations of gods were born, divine figures whose personalities, ambitions, and conflicts mirror human traits, yet are amplified to cosmic proportions, capable of shaking the heavens and stirring the earth with a word or a gesture. Some texts depict Apsu planning to destroy his younger offspring, a dramatic reflection of the tension between old and new, of the anxiety inherent in creation itself, while Ea, the clever and resourceful god of wisdom, intervenes, overthrowing Apsu and establishing the foundations of divine order. This act sets in motion a cosmic struggle that climaxes with Tiamat's furious retaliation, shaping the dramatic confrontations where gods wield storms, floods, and monstrous creatures as weapons. Their clashes described with terrifying intensity, rivers boiling, skies splitting, winds tearing through plains, and the very earth trembling beneath their fury. Marduk, rising as a champion among gods, ultimately defeats Tiamat, cleaving her body to fashion the heavens and the earth, a symbolic act suggesting that the universe itself is carved from conflict, that order emerges from chaos, and that human civilization reflects this divine triumph over primordial disorder. Some scholars interpret this cosmogony as an allegory for natural processes, rivers flooding, storms breaking, land forming, while others see it as a projection of political structures, with younger gods asserting dominance over the old, echoing human struggles for power and hierarchy. These myths paint a world in which creation is inseparable from conflict, where every mountain, river, and city is imbued with the echoes of divine battles, and where human life is situated within a vast, often unfathomable cosmic order. As we trace these origins, the question arises, if the world itself was forged in violence and negotiation, what does that say about our own attempts to impose order, to find meaning, and to navigate the forces both seen and unseen that shape our lives and destinies? The epic of Gilgamesh, mortality, friendship, and the quest for meaning. Sit back and imagine a city walled against the desert, the hum of bustling markets, the scent of baked clay, and the heat rising from the sun-baked bricks, the city of Uruk, where a king 2/3 divine and 1/3 human rules with a strength and arrogance that unsettles both gods and mortals alike. This is Gilgamesh, a figure whose story has endured for over 4,000 years, carried across generations on clay tablets etched in cuneiform, each wedge-shaped mark preserving a fragment of human curiosity about life, death, and the eternal. The epic begins with his unchecked power, his restless energy that leaves his people longing for relief, until the gods create Enkidu, a wild man of the steppe, shaped from clay and innocence, untamed, whose initial confrontation with Gilgamesh sparks not only conflict but a profound companionship. a bond that teaches both what it means to live and to care for another. Together, they embark on quests that are as much spiritual and existential as they are physical, slaying the monstrous Humbaba in the cedar forest, confronting the bull of heaven sent by an offended goddess, and testing the limits of their courage and morality. These adventures are vividly painted with sensory detail, the dense, fragrant woods where the air tastes of resin and fear, the dust-choked plains where the bull charges with thunder in its hooves, the shadows of tombs where mortality presses close, reminding us that human life is fragile, fleeting, and incomprehensibly precious. The narrative shifts with brutal inevitability when Enkidu dies, a moment that plunges Gilgamesh into despair, awakening the timeless fear of death and the longing for immortality. Some scholars suggest that this epic is a meditation on the human condition itself, exploring grief, legacy, and the pursuit of understanding in a world governed by unpredictable divine forces. Others see in it a blueprint for ethical living, a reflection on friendship, courage, and the search for wisdom beyond brute strength. Gilgamesh's journey to find Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of a great flood, takes him across perilous waters, through sun-scorched deserts and into shadowed realms, each step echoing humanity's ceaseless quest to grasp what lies beyond the mortal veil. And yet, despite his encounters with the eternal, the story leaves us lingering on a profound truth: mortality is inescapable. Yet it is precisely this impermanence that gives life its depth, its urgency, and its beauty. As we turn the clay tablets in our mind's eye, the question remains suspended in the dust of Uruk. What would we do? What would we value if we too knew our days were numbered? And yet, the story whispers, there is meaning to be found in the living, the loving and the striving, creation, chaos, and the Mesopotamian cosmos. Close your eyes and imagine the cosmos as the Mesopotamians might have seen it, a vast, formless expanse of watery chaos, dark and boundless, stretching beyond sight, before the first spark of order emerged. In this primordial universe, the deities Apsu and Tiamat stir in silence, embodying the raw, unfathomable forces of fresh water and salt. Life and destruction, male and female energies intertwined in a tension that hums beneath existence itself. From this turbulent beginning, the myths tell us, the first gods arose, young and curious, noisy and defiant, whose restless energy disturbed the quiet of the primeval deep. Some stories suggest that Apsu, threatened by the vigor of these new gods, planned their annihilation, a plan that would provoke a violent response, setting in motion a cosmic struggle between generations. It is Ea, the god of wisdom and magic, who intervenes, slaying Apsu and claiming his power, a moment that establishes the first triumph of order over chaos, intelligence over raw force, yet also sows the seeds of Tiamat's vengeful fury. The imagery here is stunning in its scale. Tiamat, often depicted as a vast dragon or serpent, her body a swirling tempest of salt water and fury, breathing storms that can shatter mountains, her limbs coiling across the horizon, her roar shaking the heavens. From this epic clash emerges Marduk, a younger deity whose cunning, strategy, and unmatched power allow him to defeat Tiamat, splitting her body to form the heavens above and the earth below, crafting a cosmos structured and comprehensible, a universe where humans might dwell, harvest, and dream. Scholars argue that this myth reflects a human need to impose meaning on a world that is often violent, unpredictable, and overwhelming, suggesting that civilization itself is born from the desire to tame chaos, to order society, and to understand natural phenomena. Others suggest a psychological reading. The story embodies internal struggles, conflicts between generations, the tension of creativity and destruction, and the human confrontation with mortality and fear. As Marduk arranges the stars, sets the moon in its path, and establishes the cycles of day and night, the narrative whispers that cosmic order is both fragile and hard-won, a structure emerging from chaos through wisdom, courage, and sometimes ruthless necessity. And yet, as we linger on this vision of the primordial waters and the towering, writhing forms of Tiamat, a lingering question remains. If the universe itself was carved from conflict, from the struggle of forces beyond comprehension, what does that suggest about the human stories that would arise beneath it, and the gods whose whispers still echo in the myths we read today? The Great Flood and the test of mortality in the pantheon of Mesopotamian myths. Few stories resonate with the same haunting weight as the tale of the Great Flood, a narrative that captures the fragile tension between human ambition and divine will, and reminds us that mortality is never far from the surface of existence. Picture a world alive with cities and temples, gardens irrigated by the lifeblood of the Tigris and Euphrates, communities thriving under the watchful eyes of their gods. Yet beneath this veneer of prosperity lies a persistent divine unease. The gods, disturbed by human noise, excess, or the proliferation of life, decide to send a cataclysm to cleanse the earth, a flood of unimaginable proportions. Some researchers believe this myth reflects historical memory, perhaps inspired by catastrophic flooding along Mesopotamian rivers, while others interpret it symbolically, a meditation on mortality, humility, and the precariousness of human endeavor. Central to this narrative is Atrahasis, or in later versions, Utnapishtim, a figure who embodies the intersection of wisdom, foresight, and the will to survive. Guided by divine instruction, he constructs a massive vessel, measures every plank and rivet with precision, and gathers living creatures to preserve life across the deluge. As the waters rise, engulfing mountains and swallowing the earth, one can almost hear the roar of the rivers, the cracking of wood, the desperate cries of humanity and beasts alike, symphony of chaos held in suspended terror. And yet, within this devastation, there is a profound lesson. Survival requires both humility before the forces of nature and obedience to higher wisdom, a recognition that life itself is a fragile gift, subject to powers beyond comprehension. When the floodwaters finally recede, the world emerges, transformed, cleansed yet scarred, a new beginning rising from the waters. The gods, having tested their creation, grant humanity a renewed chance to live, to build, to labor, and to honor the delicate balance between life and mortality. The Mesopotamian flood myth does not merely recount disaster. It engages with existential questions that persist across time. Why do humans suffer? Why do we endure? And how are we to understand our place within the vast, often indifferent cosmos? As the echoes of this ancient flood ripple through history, influencing later myths, biblical narratives, and cultural consciousness, one is left with a lingering, almost vertiginous question. If life can be swept away in a single storm, what does it mean to live wisely, to act rightly, and to leave a mark upon a world that might one day rise and fall again under the judgment of the gods? The underworld and the journey beyond the rivers, the cities, and the grandeur of Mesopotamian civilization lies a realm few dared to contemplate fully: the underworld. A shadowed, liminal space where the living meet the dead and the boundaries of existence blur into uncertainty. Known variously as Kor, Akkad, or the land of no return, this subterranean domain is ruled by Ereshkigal, the enigmatic queen of darkness, whose authority is absolute and whose judgment spares none. Imagine descending through layers of soil and stone, past whispering echoes of the departed, the air growing colder, heavier, as the sun's warmth fades and the light of day becomes a memory. Some researchers suggest that these myths reflect early human attempts to grapple with death, mortality, and the unknown, while others propose that the underworld served as a moral framework, a place where human actions, both noble and wicked, would ultimately find their reckoning. Within these narratives, one encounters heroes and deities alike who venture into this shadowed world. Inanna, the great goddess of love and war, who descends to confront her sister Ereshkigal, stripping away her power, her divinity, and even her identity, only to emerge transformed, reborn, carrying with her lessons of vulnerability, courage, and the inexorable cycle of life and death. The underworld is not merely a repository for the dead. It is a mirror of the living, reflecting fears, desires, and the inevitability of decline that no mortal can escape. Rivers of sorrow, gates guarded by fearsome creatures, and the unending silence of those who dwell there create an atmosphere of suspense, of dread mingled with awe. Some scholars believe these tales influenced later conceptions of hell and the afterlife, embedding themselves subtly into religious thought, literature, and collective imagination. The journey through the underworld is as much internal as external, an exploration of the human psyche confronting loss, accountability, and the transient nature of power and beauty. Each myth, each descent, asks the listener to consider, what does it mean to face the inevitable, to traverse the darkness without certainty of return, and to emerge bearing the knowledge of mortality? As the echoes of footsteps fade in this subterranean realm, as shadows stretch and twist across the walls of memory, one cannot help but wonder whether the underworld exists only in myth, or whether it is a symbolic corridor that each living soul must navigate. Consciously or not, in the quiet, unspoken hours of reflection and fear, the questions linger, heavy and unyielding. What waits beyond the final breath, and what wisdom more terror might it hold for those who dare to imagine its depths? The epic of Gilgamesh and the quest for immortality among all Mesopotamian myths. None resonates with such enduring power as the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story etched into clay tablets more than 4 millennia ago, yet still vibrating with questions that pierce the human heart. What does it mean to live, to die, and to leave a mark upon the world? Sit back, relax, and imagine the bustling city of Uruk, its towering walls casting long shadows over sun-baked streets, the air thick with the scent of baked clay, livestock, and incense, while a young king, Gilgamesh, strides with unmatched confidence, his presence both awe-inspiring and feared. He is not merely a ruler. He is a man consumed by the tension between power and mortality, a hero whose feats are monumental, yet whose fears are profoundly human. Alongside him stands Enkidu, a wild man shaped by the earth itself, untamed and free, whose friendship awakens in Gilgamesh a tenderness he has never known. Together they confront demons, slay monstrous beasts, and challenge gods, their adventures echoing across the land and beyond the reach of time. Some scholars believe the epic functions as a meditation on mortality. Others suggest it is a blueprint for heroism and ethical conduct, while still others read it as a symbolic narrative of human consciousness wrestling with the inevitability of death. When Enkidu dies, the narrative transforms from external adventure to internal quest. Gilgamesh, gripped by grief and terror, embarks on a journey across deserts, mountains, and storm-tossed seas, seeking Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of a great flood, whose secrets promise the elusive gift of eternal life. Picture endless plains under a star-strewn sky, winds carrying whispers of forgotten civilizations, and rivers reflecting the passage of centuries as Gilgamesh presses onward, his desire for immortality both heroic and futile. The epic does not offer neat answers, instead leaving us with profound questions. Can one ever truly escape death? Or does the pursuit of legacy, memory, and connection carry its own form of eternity? The narrative lingers in the mind like the faint echo of a drumbeat in a vast, empty hall, urging reflection on friendship, loss, courage, and the boundaries of human aspiration. As we follow Gilgamesh's journey through realms both mortal and divine, we are confronted with our own fragile existence, the fleeting nature of joy and the quiet, inescapable truth that all stories, like lives, must eventually end, but perhaps, through remembrance and storytelling, they may ripple outward, touching generations yet to come. The quest for immortality persists, whispering across millennia, what does it truly mean to live forever? And can the heart, if not the body, achieve such an impossible dream? Mesopotamian cosmology and the architecture of the heavens. Imagine, if you will, the night sky as seen from the flat plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, an expanse so dark that the stars seem to pulse with intent, each one a divine spark in the vast canvas of creation. The Mesopotamians did not merely observe these stars. They wove them into a cosmic map, a lattice of meaning that connected gods, humans, and the very forces of the universe. Sit back and picture ziggurats rising from the earth like stairways to the heavens, their sun-baked bricks glowing amber in the fading light, each tier a symbol of order, hierarchy, and divine proximity. Some researchers suggest these monumental structures were designed not only as temples, but as physical embodiments of the cosmos itself, a way for humans to touch the divine, to climb closer to the mysteries of the universe. The Mesopotamian understanding of the cosmos was intricate. The heavens were divided into multiple layers, each ruled by specific deities, while the underworld stretched below like an inverted mirror, dark, silent, and inexorable. Rivers and mountains were not mere geography but arteries of life, thresholds of chaos, and channels of divine will. The movements of celestial bodies, the phases of the moon, and the wandering paths of planets were interpreted as messages, signs of favor or warning from the gods. Some scholars believe that this celestial mapping formed the earliest foundations of astrology, an attempt to decode the divine language written across the night sky. The interweaving of myth and observation created a worldview where every natural event, eclipses, storms, was a thread in a vast living tapestry of meaning, where humanity's fortunes were entwined with the rhythms of the universe. Listen closely, and you might hear the imagined whispers of priests tracing star charts on clay tablets, inked with meticulous symbols that encoded knowledge both sacred and practical. From one mystery to the next, we see that Mesopotamian cosmology was not abstract speculation but a lived reality, a way to navigate existence and comprehend the unseen forces shaping human life. And yet, despite millennia of study, much remains hidden in the gaps between texts, in the eroded clay of tablets, and in the shadows of temples long crumbled to dust. What did these ancient observers truly understand about the heavens? Were they mere storytellers projecting human concerns onto the stars? Or did they glimpse truths about the universe that modern science is only beginning to touch? The cosmos, as they imagined it, remains a mystery suspended between earth and sky, inviting us to wonder, to question, and to peer into the infinite once more. The enduring echo of Mesopotamian myths as we approach the final whispers of our journey through Mesopotamian mythology. Imagine standing in a vast, silent desert, where the wind shifts the sand like the turning pages of an ancient, unread tome. The stories that arose from the earliest cities, Uruk, Babylon, did not vanish with the fall of empires. They seeped into the marrow of human culture, carried across rivers and deserts, translated into new tongues, and reshaped in distant lands. Sit back and feel the weight of this legacy, the sense that the gods, heroes, and primordial forces of Mesopotamia continue to murmur through our collective imagination. Some researchers argue that these myths form the backbone of narrative thought, the archetypes that reappear in religions, literature, and psychology across millennia. Their patterns recognizable even when names and settings change. Envision the epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed on fragile clay, a tale of friendship, mortality, and the pursuit of eternal meaning, resonating with the same poignancy today as it did 4,000 years ago. Others suggest that even the flood stories, mirrored in texts far beyond Mesopotamia, speak to a universal human concern, the fragile boundary between order and chaos, creation and destruction, life and death. The textures of these myths, the dust of clay tablets, the echoes of the imagined voices of priests and scribes invite us to experience not only the content of the stories, but the very mindset of the people who first told them. From one city to the next, from one tablet to another, the continuity of human curiosity, fear, hope, and imagination shines through. The narratives were tools for understanding the cosmos, guides for ethical conduct, and mirrors reflecting the complexities of human society. And yet, even as we interpret, analyze, and reconstruct, some elements remain tantalizingly elusive, buried beneath layers of time and erosion. What did these myths mean to those who lived and breathed within their shadowed temples? How did they shape the way people perceived life, death, and the divine? The answers are partially visible, like constellations glimpsed through shifting clouds, but much remains open to interpretation. As the sun sets on our exploration, the echoes of Mesopotamia linger, a testament to the endurance of human imagination and the timeless desire to understand our place in the universe. These ancient voices continue to speak, inviting us to listen, to dream, and to wonder. And so, as you drift toward sleep, let the myths of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria wash over you, their rhythms, their questions, their mysteries weaving into the quiet of the night, leaving one final, lingering thought: what secrets of the past might still awaken in the minds of those who dare to seek them?